So I just got this jacket and I, wore it today because I just got it. And I asked Mr. Soap and Clay, like what he thought of my jacket. And he goes, yeah, no, I like it. I told you that I liked it when you bought it. And I'm like, no, I just bought this one. And he looks and he goes to one of the many places where my clothing is held right now. And he comes out with a jacket that looks exactly like this one. The only difference is there are no stars on it, really. So I could have just taken my cry cut and done some stars and created this jacket. And this seems to be a running trend in my house, really. And that's a problem. But also one of the reasons why we are building such a big new house. So there's that. That obviously has nothing to do with what we are doing today, but my time. I will tell you all about what we are doing in just a minute, but before I do, hello, I am Mrs. Soap and Clay. I have a clothing addiction. Let's make stuff. How's it going, sudsers? Welcome back to the channel. You are at Soap and Clay, where we make all the soapy things, and you are here for day 127 of 365 days of soap, and today we're doing cosmetic labeling guidelines. And it's been a while. Like, such a while. It's been such a long time coming for this, and I was actually a bit shooketh that I needed 4 videos for soap labeling just to get to this point. And so, we will go ahead and do a quick recap of the 4 videos that we did, before we dive into this one. And, first and foremost, soap, cosmetic, drug, right? A soap is a soap if you say that it cleans, and that's it. A soap is a cosmetic if you say that it cleans and moisturizes. A soap is a drug if you say that a soap treats acne, okay? Now, every time you make a claim, it does put you into a different category of labeling and what the requirements are therein. And today we are going to focus on cosmetic labeling. I don't know that we will do drug labeling at all, because that is, in order to actually market a drug, it's a completely different thing with the FDA and it's not something that I think any small business soap maker is going to be dipping their toe into. Although there were a number of small business soap makers that were trying to make antibacterial soap, mid 2020. So that's a drug. But yeah, so I don't think we're really going to cover that. We are going to focus on cosmetic labeling and I think be done with the labeling stuff. Unless some crazy things happen on the interwebs and one of the sudsers tags me in it and I have to do a myth debunking again. That one was fun, by the way. So, tag me. That'd be cool. What we're going to cover in this section are going to be a lot of those myths and those misconceptions that exist out there in regards to labeling a soap as a cosmetic, or really labeling anything else that you might make as a cosmetic. Because remember, soap, according to the FDA and the CPSC's definition of soap, it's the combination of your alkali solution and your fatty acids. And that's it. So if you put in a detergent, a Syndet, that's no longer labeled just soap. That is now a cosmetic. again, if you make any claims, it moisturizes, it shines the hair, that's now a cosmetic. And so you have to label them accordingly. Everything else that you might make, though, your bath bombs, your lotion bars, your lotions, your pomades, your shampoo bars. So I've said it multiple times before in multiple videos. I think you should go ahead and just label all of your products according to cosmetic guidelines. That does not mean you have to if all you are doing is saying that your soap cleans. I think you should, just because I've met very few soap makers in life that literally just make soap. So it's good to get into the habit of just labeling them the right way anyway. But that's neither here nor there. What we are going to talk about is how you label them the right way, as well as some of the things that have been said on the interwebs about cosmetic labeling, and kind of break through some of the bullshit and get to what is actually required and what we actually need. So, that's what we're doing today. And it's going to be a good time. Okay, to recap, first up, soap, if it's just soap and it is only marketed as it is meant to clean, then the CPSC oversees it. And they control all safety issues and all of that. They do not have specific labeling guidelines. So essentially, we have to go to the FTC to determine what the labeling guidelines are for a consumer commodity. And the FTC doesn't really have any guidelines as far as an ingredient declaration for consumer commodities. So realistically, all you need on a bar of soap is what it is, the product identity, where it's made, the location, and what it weighs. And that's it. Also, you can still, because we live in the gray area with soap, not label your product at all, and it can be naked. So there's that. Go ahead and put your information on the interwebs, though. Get it on your website, because I just do that. You need to have a card that you can give to people at fairs or on a website, something. Okay. Now, if you have made a claim that says the soap does something other than clean, it moisturizes, it exfoliates, it's no longer a soap. It's a cosmetic, because what you are doing is you are making a claim that your soap does something to temporarily beautify the body and the appearance in some way. Therefore, now cosmetic. So now, not only do you need the product identity, what it is, where it was made, how much it weighs, you also need an ingredients declaration. This is where I think a lot of the confusion comes in with the forums and stuff, when people start popping off and saying, where's your ingredients? You can't have it. The number of times I have seen that post on a front picture of someone's label, and the first thing someone says is, where's your ingredients declaration? You can't do that. Your ingredients are not supposed to be on the front of the package. It's not. That is the principal display panel, and that is all that's really supposed to be on there. What it is, where it was made, and how much it weighs. And obviously, like the title of the whatever and, your website, that's all good information to have on there too. But the ingredients declaration usually goes on the back. Or in cases of, if you have like a lotion that you've put into a box, or like a soap that you put into a box, the ingredients declaration goes on the back. And all those requirements for ingredients declaration, font sizes, all those things, those are governed and controlled really by the overarching law, which is the FPLA, the Federal Packaging and Labeling Act. Yes. That was adopted and made into law like in 1966. And there have been some changes along the way, as needs must. And it was decided, because that's the law, right? That's the overarching law, but it's not the whole thing. And for that reason, different departments within the government have been assigned to control, a drug or a pesticide or a food or a cosmetic. And so in our case, we are dealing with the FDA because they deal with cosmetics, and therefore the guidelines are within the FDA's requirements. Now, also something to keep in mind, there is, as far as this weight thing that we've been talking about for like 5 videos now, there's also like the uniform measurements something. The Uniform Weights and Measures Law. Yes. And that is really where all of the meat of what it weighs and where it goes kind of comes into play. Just really all you need to know from any of that is you have to put what it weighs on the front of the label, talking soaps, and you cannot put it in such a small font that it can't be read. There actually is a requirement for that. And it can never be more than what is actually in that. So if your bars, when they are fresh, weigh out at 5.5 ounces, but some of them end up fully curing out at 5 ounces, others at 5.25 ounces, you can't label all of them 5.25 ounces. It's better to undershoot that measurement. So the lightest bar in the batch really is what you should be putting on your labels. Now, I also know a lot of soap makers that individually weigh their bars and then write the weight in to the label. And it's great. I sell too many damn soaps to do something like that. So I prefer to just go ahead and take the smallest, the lightest bar and use that as my unit of measurement. And so, some people, hey, bigger bars. Other people, you're guaranteed to always get at least that 4 ounces or that 5 ounces or whatever. So that's kind of where the Uniform Weights and Measures comes in. That's why we have to put how much it weighs on the soap, on the package. Got it? Good. Now, one of the more confusing things that I think soap makers come into right away when they're dealing with just specifically their soaps, and they're wondering, is it a soap or is it a cosmetic, is, well, what's the line? What's the dividing line between soap and a cosmetic claim? We've talked about it for 4 other videos. I'm going to say it again for like the 3rd time in this video. If you say that it does anything other than clean, it's now a cosmetic. And so think back on any time that you've ever said anything on your Instagram posts or your website or at a fair, just conversationally talking with a customer. If anybody walks away from any of those interactions believing that the intended use of this product is to do something other than clean, if you'd said this soap has a great moisturizing lather, this soap exfoliates, this soap really added some great shine to my hair, that's a cosmetic. That's now a cosmetic. And so this is why I've been saying, and I do believe, that you should just go ahead and label all of your soaps like they're a cosmetic just to cover your own ass. Because A, there's nothing whatsoever wrong with telling the consumer what they're getting. And 2, you want to be safe. You want to protect your business. You put so much work into it. Why let a silly thing like ingredients list on the back, muck that up and really jeopardize all of your hard work? Granted, my opinion on the matter regarding just soap does not mean you have to. I'm just saying, it'll be easier for you overall if you just do. Anyway, moving on. So if you say it does anything other than cleanse, it's cosmetic. Also, as a side note, I think you should be very careful when you start talking about your essential oils and aromatherapy and what essential oils do. And because like tea tree oil, for example, tea tree oil is a great example of that, because you can put like undiluted tea tree oil like on your temples for headaches and like as an insecticide and all this stuff. You start saying things like that about your essential oils that you put into your products, we're now encroaching on drug territory, and you don't actually want to be there. I'll put some links below and you can look up the requirements for submitting and getting your product approved for a drug. Since we're talking about approval here, real quick before we actually move into the meat and potatoes of all of this, I know that there are a ton of soap makers out there that are afraid that they have done something wrong because they have made a claim that now makes their product a cosmetic. Or maybe they've been making a cosmetic like a lotion or a bath bomb and they hadn't even thought about it. And now they're afraid that they've, stepped outside of the law. Please don't freak out about that. You don't have to register your company or your products in the United States with the FDA if you are making cosmetic claims. You don't. You do not. And really, in all actuality, if we're getting into how it's actually all, even regulated and whatever, they're not going to come after a small business soaper. That does not mean that you should not pay attention to the requirements. You should, 100%. But if you're afraid that you've done something wrong, and if you've done something wrong with your labeling, you can correct. And if you still feel really uneasy about it, and you want to get a better, more definitive thing, so you're not afraid that the feds are going to come knocking on your door because you said that your soap was moisturizing and you didn't have the right ingredient declaration on the back, reach out. Register your company with the FDA. You can do that. There is a process to do that, but it's not required. You're going to be fine. Please don't be worried about that. It's not required to do so, to register your products or your company, but you do need to pay attention to how things are labeled and make sure that you're doing it right. And so throughout all of this, we are going to go through the ingredient declaration and the label. And I think we're going to go ahead and go to an actual example with all of this. And I'm going to format a label here so we can do this together. And you have an idea of what all of this means. Okay? We're all going to be fine. Let's go ahead and get your ingredients labels and your labels in general dialed in so you know that you are fine just across the board. Okay? Okay, so realistically, the first thing that you're going to think about when you are labeling via cosmetic is going to be the front of your product. And that is the principal display panel. That's the first thing that the consumer sees when they look at your product. Now, on that, you definitely have to have what it is and how much it weighs. So the product identity and what it weighs. I was unable to find any sort of definitive information about whether or not you could have your where it's made on the front on your principal display panel. I was unable to find out whether or not that could or could not be included on the principal display panel. So for me personally, I kill two birds, one stone with my soaps and say like handcrafted soap made in Gig Harbor, Washington 98335. That's where it's located. Street address does not need to go on your labels at all. FDA has basically ruled in on this. They ruled in on this, but they didn't rule in such a way that they were willing to change the actual parameters. They just said that if you are easily findable, if your address is easily findable on an online search engine, then your actual street address does not need to be on there. Now, the principal display panel, a couple things are always coming up in these forums about how things should be structured and whatnot. And one of them is where the net weight goes, how much it weighs goes. And the other is, I guess three things, because font size as well as font. So just logic this out a little bit, okay? Just think of all the fonts that exist in the literal world. So many. So if the FDA were to make a rule, a law, and include in their packaging requirements that you could only use a sans serif font, it sort of defeats the purpose of a law. You know what I mean? One of the things with guidelines and requirements and laws is that they need to be, by definition, kind of vague so they can account for all of the unknowns, really. So that doesn't make sense. What does make sense in regards to what type of font you need is the font needs to be legible. So on your principal display panel and everywhere on your labeling to that, you need to make sure that you are selecting a font that people can read. You also need to make sure that you are not structuring your labels in such a way that makes it difficult to read. So if you're putting a weird color on it that people have to holographically, and I know we've all had cosmetics that have just that, but that's a whole different can of worms, and we're not talking about that. I was actually just looking at I guess we are talking about that. I was just looking at a mascara tube that came in my Ipsy bag, and it had this weird iridescent font on it, and I'm having to try to read it. Technically speaking, you're not supposed to do that. But again, we're not basing what we do, our best practices, on what somebody else does. Okay? We're gonna do the right things for our business. And so the type of font is definitely not regulated and enforced by the FDA or the FTC or the CPSC. That is not a thing. All it says is it needs to be legible. So doing some sort of scripty font, yeah, it's not the best idea if it's not a readable font. Side note to that, having learned from experience, when I first started out, we had this idea that we were going to model like the fonts off of my handwriting. And so my webman did that, and it worked out decent-ish on the website, right? And on my labels, it ended up being really hard to read a lot of the time. And so I slowly started to shift my font into something that was easier to read because I wanted it to be able to read, really. And so while that was like a good idea in theory and it could still be read, I didn't like that you couldn't really just tell from a mile away that my soap was named the Tyler Durden. And so we kind of went away from that scripty handwriting font and moved into something that's easier to read, like everything behind me that you're now reading and probably have been for the last 30 seconds or so. So just don't select scripty fonts with anything in your business anyway. You're going to hate it eventually, I promise. I know it's pretty, but don't do it. Just resist the temptation. So anyway, no such thing as required fonts. Now, font sizes, that's a little bit different. So the numbers that get bandied about quite a bit are 1/16 of an inch and 1/32 of an inch, depending on the size of your actual product and what you're trying to label. Now, for soap, so good. Can you pick up a bar of soap without smelling it? I say no. For soap, to determine the principal display panel, you take the width times the height. So this is like 2.5 inches by 3 inches. So that's like around 7 inches, right? And so that's the area. The whole thing is the area that I have to put a principal display panel on. The whole soap. I do cigar bands, which are small enough that I can get 11 of them on a page because I create and print all of my own labels. Now, that is completely fine. These are all 1 inch tall because it does not, none of the font that's on this particular soap band goes under that 1/16 of an inch, right? Now, what is 1/16 of an inch? I mean, you can Google the thing and find out. But also in Marie Gale's book, she did some examples. And so that's kind of fun. So we're going to go to Marie Gale's book and check that out for the examples that she put in hers. So she gave some type sizes as examples. And so 1/32 of an inch is really, by all accounts, a 3-point font. Have you ever used a 3-point font in your life? Like, I put labels on lip balms and I've never gone that small. You can do, though, because a lip balm is less than 12 square inches of like the whole surface area. So you can do, but I've never done so. 1/16 of an inch, which is what you're going to be working with for your principal display panels, as well as your ingredients and all of the things. That's the smallest you can go with all of it, okay? Is anywhere between a 9 and 12 point font, depending on what type of font you're using. So completely able to put all of the information you need with and still be within guidelines, knowing what those font sizes really are, right? And so for people who say that there has to be a specific font size, yes, but also no, it's 1/16 of an inch, 1/32 of an inch, if your product has less than 12 square inches of complete and total surface area. So that's around the whole thing, right? Cool. Now for the placement of the net weight. how much your product weighs, how much of your product there is. That actually, if you've seen the 30%, thrown around, the lower 30% of the principal display panel, that is true. It needs to be on the front, it needs to be on the bottom, and it needs to run the way that you read. And so if I had this and I had decided just for funsies, I was going to put my net weight going this way up the soap instead of down, then that's no bueno. Point is, you want to give all of your customers the information that they need right off the bat. And if they're interested in it after reading the front of it, they're going to turn it around, and that's where your ingredients list goes, or on the side or whatever. That's the rest. That's the informational panels. And so we have already covered principal display panels in a whole lot of videos. So I'm really not going to talk about this anymore, but just a couple things within the principal display panel that I did want to clear up. The font type, there is no requirement for that. The only requirement is it has to be legible by the average consumer. Font size, yeah, nothing less than 1/16 of an inch for things like a soap, or 1/32 of an inch for things like a lip balm. That's it. And yes, the net weight does need to exist on the principal display panel on the lower third. That's it. Okay, now let's move on to ingredients listings. And I really think we need to go to building a soap label now. Okay, so real quick, before we go to the examples, and we're going to build a label together, and it's going to be fun, a couple things. First, when is an ingredients declaration required? You already know the answer to that. Drop it in the comments, do the thing. When it's a cosmetic, when it's something other than a soap. Okay? First. Second, where does it go? On the information panel. So anywhere else on the product. You can put it on the side of your bar, you can put it on the back of your bar. As long as the font size is not less than 1/16 inch in height for, something over 12 square inches, the whole thing, or less than 1/32 inches in height for small things like lip balms or whatever, then it can go anywhere. Has to be legible. Don't obscure it. Don't make it hard to read. Okay, that. Also for things like this, where does the ingredients list go? Well, it goes on the part that the consumer can actually see. So it's not required for them to open up and take your soap out and find the ingredients list on the back. Like no. It has to be in a place where the consumers can see. So they read the front. Oh, that's interesting. Turn it over and look at the ingredients list. We're all consumers too. We sort of instinctively know that this is how it goes. Okay. Also, so for your ingredients declaration, how do the ingredients need to be listed? Do they need to be like proper botanical names, INCI? Every country is different, but for the United States, we do common names. So we do not do the INCI listing for like coconut oil, whatever that might be. Sapa, Fenis, Sierra, not the Latin, okay? We don't do the Latin. We say coconut oil. We say sodium hydroxide. We say distilled water. For flavor and fragrance, you can just say flavor and fragrance. Those are sort of like custom blends that the FDA has ruled we are not required to tell our peoples about, unless there's some sort of hazardous material that's specifically banned by the FDA within them. And if so, don't use them. Get a better flavor, get a better fragrance. Now, for micas, when you are labeling cosmetic labels, you do have to blow out what actually goes into that mica. And so that's one of the reasons why within comments and other videos, I have talked about the importance of knowing where your mica is coming from, because you need to know what they made it out of. There's a whole list of like approved cosmetic colorants that have to be approved within the FDA. It's one of the reasons why I go through Mad Micas for almost everything for my actual colorants, because they have all of those. They have like the approval things on file with the FDA, I think. And they also can they put the information here. So instead of saying micas on something like this, which is voodoo, I would say mica, titanium dioxide, manganese violet, iron oxide. Because that's what goes into making this. Now, within this is going to go in the section of your ingredient declaration that exists at 1% or less of the formulation. As I spoke about in the last labeling video we did, this does not mean this is an incidental ingredient. Ingredients at less than 1% are not incidental. They still have to be listed. You just don't have to list them in the descending order. For the rest of the stuff existing above 1%, you do have to list them in descending order. So most in the product to least in the product. So if you have a 70% olive oil soap, that obviously goes before your distilled water and your sodium hydroxide, right? Or before your saponified oils of ... Or before you're not even putting in sodium hydroxide and just doing sodium olivate, sodium cocoate. You get it. But the color does have to exist on your label. And if you are labeling following cosmetic guidelines because you've claimed that your soap does something other than clean, you do have to blow out everything that goes into that mica. And this is why I love Mad Micas, because they put it all on the list, on the front. And other companies might do that too. So if you actually have other companies that do that, like while you're watching this video, go grab one of your micas and just check the front label. Let me know and we can give them some love too. But this is what I have. It's also beautiful that I can continue to read it. And that makes it really easy for me to label my soaps. Okay, and now I think it's time for us to actually go to a real working example and let's build a label together. And you can see what I am talking about within all of this, as well as like maybe give you some guidelines if you're interested in like making soap bands, you know, how I make mine. Because I do make my own. I have been told for years that I should stop. But you know, old dogs, new tricks, all that jazz. So let's go do an example and we can learn some stuff together. Okay, so I was going to do this in AI and then realized that a lot of you might not have Illustrator because it's now a monthly pay and that monthly pay is kind of expensive. And so instead we're going to do this in Canva. Now, Canva is actually a really easy platform to use. As you can see, I had a bunch of my other things. I do my thumbnails in there, social media, all the jazz. So, and it's free for a lot of things. And you can put your whole branding in there, your logos. I'm pretty sure that part's free too. I don't know. I pay $100. I don't know if it's a year or a one-time thing. This is not a sponsorship. We are not doing this shit. Anyway, these little bars here are the bands here. These are my cigar bands. And I got this measurement for how long they needed to be by taking, you know, a tape measure, one of those fabric guys, to my bars, and they need to be 7 inches. My bands need to be 7 inches long in order to do this. Now, as you can see with all the fonts that I'm looking at here, I am well within the rights and the reasons and the parameters for font size with absolutely everything on the label. And in the first example that I have up there, I have put in saponified oils of olive, coconut, rice bran, castor, naturally occurring glycerin, and made with kaolin clay, activated charcoal, fragrance, mica, titanium dioxide, chromium oxide green. Now, that is okay to do, but we're talking in the pot, out of the pot, because we're doing cosmetic labeling. And so what I would prefer is we should do the sizing here. Now this is an interesting thing for the net weight. FDA has another one of these gray areas when it comes to the net weight, putting it in ounces as well as in the metric and the grams. They sort of abandoned this thing wherein they were going to require that cosmetic labeling has both ounces and grams. So the metric system in addition to US. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it shouldn't be selected or it shouldn't be on there, because a lot of states already have laws in place for that. Now, I talked to my state, to Washington State, and they were just kind of confused. They're like, yeah, no, food has to have both US and metric measurements. And I'm like, right, but I don't make food. I make cosmetics. I make a soap or a cosmetic. I'm going to, you know, whatever. You get it. And they were like, yeah, I don't know. I don't see anything about cosmetics. So just to cover your own ass, put it in ounces and grams, because I think at some point probably the rest of the world is going to demand that the United States stops being stupid and just embraces the metric system. Because there was like a hot minute, I think in the 70s, where we were trying to, I guess. I think I remember my mom talking about that and having to figure that out in school. But then it like stopped. So just go ahead and put your net weight in ounces and grams. But the thing about that is putting it in there and even just adding those extra, 6 characters, it makes everything kind of weird with how the label gets spaced. Now, the things that are not required to be on the front of my package, handmade in Gig Harbor with my state and zip, not required. Soap has to be on there somewhere. So, I want to keep that. Website is not required. My logo isn't even really required, right? And so you can play around with that. Or you can also look and see how the ingredients list changes based on just messing with some sizing from left to right as far as the width of the box that you are working within. So this will be on the back of my panel. And as well as how you actually structure your labels. So this would be an in the pot in order of how much goes in. So obviously olive oil and coconut oil make up the majority of this particular recipe, and the rice bran and castor oil are each at 5%. So with the saponified oils of ... all of the oils that are saponified go first, and then naturally occurring glycerin and made with all the other things. For this, if we're labeling most to least, it would go olive oil, coconut oil, distilled water, sodium hydroxide, rice bran oil, and castor oil, and then my clays, my charcoals, my fragrance, and my micas that are blown out there. So as you can see, just less words in this overall, therefore less space on your label, which is cool. And that would allow me to actually put my website underneath all of that and kind of clean up some of the weirdness that's going on with that. So, and then I can, make my logo bigger and maybe move the net weight to be in the middle, or maybe not, whatever. And as long as it's in the lower third, that's all that really matters. But as you can see, as I've been hitting all of these things, the font size that you can see up there, it's still all within the parameters, right? So that's good. Now, another way to do this would be to label the out of the pot, which is what I really prefer to do if I'm labeling cosmetically. So you're going to label what the olive oil becomes once it comes in contact with the lye solution and is saponified. What the coconut oil, what the rice bran oil, what the castor oil, you get it. But here's the thing, if we're labeling out of the pot for cosmetics, we still have to label most to least. So I need to put the glycerin in there, because out of the pot also comes glycerin. And I showed you guys how to factor glycerin and therefore let you know, tell you where it needs to be in your labels. So if my rice bran oil and my castor oil are both sitting at 5% of the total, and the glycerin for this is coming in at 8%, well, obviously that gets listed before the rice bran and the castor in the saponified, value. And then, of course, your clays and your colorants and your scents and all of that jazz. Now, this is a very clean looking label right here. And you can obviously make it bigger. I just do mine 1 inch tall because I want to get 11 on a page. But you can make it bigger so you can sort of get some breathing room between all of these different lines of copy if you want. And that's completely fine. But point is, on the front, that info panel, the principal display panel has everything it needs, what it is, where it's, how much it weighs and where it's from, right? I guess technically whatever. That's a different, whatever. And the back would be the rest of the panel, right? That would be the rest of the surface area. And within the guidelines for a surface area of 12 inches or more, which this is, all of it fits. And then you just save it, and bada bing, bada boom, you have a label that you can then print out in bulk on a big sheet of paper. And it's pretty easy stuff. And, there's some examples on how to build an ingredients label. Now, once you get into the groove of this, it's actually not complicated, and you're just going to start doing this, and your brain is just going to get it. I again, do make all of my own labels. And I do so because I don't like keeping a product in my line for very long these days. And so to that, it's easier for me just to have a template in Illustrator and make the labels. So if you're interested in learning how to make labels and stuff and your social media things in Canva, let me know. Because if you don't have Illustrator, which I think a lot of people maybe don't, this is like an easy, really fun option too. So, let me know. It's not very complicated. And you can do this. It's not hard. Your brain will figure it out. And I do recommend that you just go ahead and label all of your products following cosmetic guidelines just to cover your own ass. Because then you actually have the freedom to say, hey, my soap is moisturizing, and know that you haven't broken any laws. And that's awesome. So to wrap this all up, what does this all mean? This means that if you are making anything other than a soap or claiming that your soap does anything other than cleanse, you have to follow cosmetic labeling guidelines. As you can see with all of this, the guidelines aren't really that strict, and they're not nearly as scary and crazy as people on the interwebs try to make them. And I'm going to go back to the thing that I've said in previous videos. Stop listening to all of the things that are on the interwebs. There were so many comments in the last video about like people that were terrified because they had made their soap labels just soap, not a cosmetic, and put their ingredients list on the front, and then someone had dogpiled on them in the forums about how this is wrong and now you're illegal. And they were legit scared. That's messed up. Like, no. It's not that complicated. And, if you have questions, and I'm sure we're going to get questions, so I'm sure this is going to be a two-parter because just like in the other one, there were things that I didn't cover, like I had never even thought about for the bullshit, really, that's being said on the interwebs. We might need to cover some more things. But in the interim, honestly, buy the book. The book helps. And there are a couple things that I don't agree with in the book. Again, it's not that I don't agree with them. It's that people are, instead of buying the book, I think, honestly, going to Marie Gale's blog and kind of cherry picking what she's saying to make it fit their argument for the time at the time. So buy the book. It's a really, really good reference point for all of the things. I'm also not sponsored by Marie Gale. And I also understand that there's some controversy surrounding her, and I don't get into that. I am a soap channel, so I don't care. But this is a good book. She put a lot of work into this, and it's not really inaccurate. So go get it and then refer to it whenever you have a question about whether or not you're labeling something correctly. Also, if you have more questions about that, go to the FDA. Reach out to them. For sure. They answer. They respond. I promise. Yes. And, if you have more questions, you can also talk to me about it, and I can help you out too. But as I've said before, don't believe everything that you see on the internet. Don't be afraid of things, just in general. You're going to be fine. You're doing a good job. This is important. It's good information to have out there. Follow the guidelines. And if you slip up, fix it. Because as I said before, in the words of the late, great, and incomparable Maya Angelou, when we know better, we do better. And so go forth. Continue making awesome soaps and cosmetics. Don't sweat the small stuff. The making of the product is always the small stuff. But, sweat the ingredients listing and what you need on your labeling a little bit. Just a little bit. Spend an afternoon, dial in your labels, and then you won't have to do it again. So yes, that does it for me today. I am out of here. I need to go get the Soap and Clay Kidlets some dinner, which they made, by the way. They made a chicken corn chowder, which was fun. And yeah, I am so glad that you guys joined me today. Hopefully I cleared up some confusion. And, if I didn't and you still have questions, obviously drop them below. I'm always happy to chat with all of you all of the time. Thank you so much for joining me for another round of 365 days of soap. I will see you guys all again tomorrow for another round of soapy, not labely fun. Bye.